Now for some context, my house is right beside some woods, a small probably 1 by 1 mile patch of woods. My parents and I are sitting on our patio a few weeks ago at night. My parents were drinking beers and I was outside on my phone. One of the few weekend nights that we all have off together, we like to spend together on the patio at night and just talk for a while. So anyway, my dad had went to bed, so it's just me and my mum, and we're cleaning up some empty beer bottles while finishing off our conversation, and my mum walked around the side of the house to throw some of the bottles into our outdoor garbage can. I was standing alone checking my phone and I heard a scream coming from the woods. There's a shed in those woods where junkies and homeless people are known to go and sleep and whatnot and set up camp, so I think it's some crazy people and I just ignored it. 30 or so seconds later, I hear it again. I then look up and turn on my phone flashlight pointing into the woods, but I can't see anything. My mum came back and asked me what was wrong, since she must have freaked out from the look on my face. I start to explain, and halfway through my sentence it starts again, but this time it was a girl's voice. She was screaming for help and yelling for someone to help her. My mum and I look at each other and take every possible measure to avoid the skinwalkers, so my mum and I gather the rest of our stuff and hurry inside. I turned my back away from the woods and heard the same voice again saying, "Hey you, come here." And I'm not joking, it sounded like it was 2 feet away from me. I almost faint, so I push my mum inside and run behind her as quick as I can. Now, I've never shut a door so quick in my life, but my god, it was scary. Now, about 3 months ago, I told her my story of backpacking in the Alchemy National Forest in here in Drummond, which I'm chalking up to weird people out there. But this weekend, we returned to the same trail system, Minster Creek. We set up camp at a different site about 3 miles north of where we stayed at last time. Now, that evening was uneventful, and we went to bed in individual tents at around 9:30. At about 2:30 a.m, however, we're woken up by a very huge boom. It's not a gunshot, it sounded more like a black powder cannon going off, echoing through the valley. We came out of our tents and discussed what we all heard, a little on edge since it was so close to us, but eventually tired, we go back to sleep. Now, the boom really had nothing to do with what happened later, but it was just weird. Now, as I'm laying in my tent, unable to sleep, staring up at the ceiling, I keep seeing shadows on the tent walls. I'd swear that I'd see the silhouette of a person walking towards the tent. As I'd look, it would disappear just as quickly as I noticed it. I decided that I'm seeing things and close my eyes, eventually drifting off to sleep. Next thing I know, I'm being woken up by a young female sounding voice saying, "Dad, Dad, Dad." I jolt awake, unsure of if I actually heard this or not. So I'm laying there, check my watch and it says 5:13 a.m. Wide awake this time. And about 30 seconds later, right next to my tent, I hear, "Dad, Dad," more urgently. There was something off about the voice too. It just sounded incredibly creepy, and I get major chills. Nothing like I've ever experienced before. Now, A, my daughter didn't come with us, and B, there were no females in our group. It was pitch black out, I see no flashlights, no lights from the fire, and I'm trying to rationalize what I'm hearing, and I sit up in my tent, thinking maybe a camper from another site wandered into ours and she was looking for her dad's tent. I unzip my tent, shining my flashlight out, and I then catch the glimpse of a black bear walking off into the woods. I uncontrollably at this point let out a large swear, waking up the rest of the group. So of course we are searching around with flashlights and find nobody else around us. The whole experience was crazy. What did I hear? Did black bears make noises like that? Was it a ghost calling me, warning about something in the campsite, or a guardian angel? God knows what it was. Now let me preface this with fact. My family has been in the Ozarks of Missouri/Arkansas since before the Civil War. It's a weird and wonderful place with lots of characters living in it. We're very rarely scared. Now running through these woods, but it's probably due to the fact that we know the weird noises, the weird oddballs that you get out there that live there. Our version of Missing 411 is some yayu getting drunk and passing out under a tree after leaving the bootleg still set up in a cave. Now, an elderly woman was arrested a couple of years ago for running a moonshine operation. Some other drugs have changed people that live there too. Now anyway, in the early 80s, my brother Steve, aged 16, went to northern Missouri flatland with his best friend Mike to visit his relatives who were farmers. He grew up to be rather independent. Driving a car by age 12 was the status quo among country kids. So aside from being required to go to church, we were pretty much allowed to do what we wanted, and it sounds like it was no different to them. We had a lot of fun goofing around and a great story to tell always. Now late one night, they were in my brother's old hot rod Mustang driving down the road, straight and narrow dirt roads of farm country, when the road became very tight with one lane with the fences lining in. Now, it can be odd to see overgrown roads in that area because the flat land is a precious commodity. He said that they were creeping along but didn't want to run into a dead end with a fence and tear up the car. And something just seemed funky. Along the lane, they passed a drive with a chained up wire hog panel as a gate. The moonlight's there, and they can see an old 2-story farmhouse that had collapsed in on itself with traditional big barns inside, and it looked like it was going to do the same at any time. There wasn't a pole light like most people kept around, and only the moonlight. They continued on the road, which seems even more overgrown, talking about whether they should just attempt to back up half a mile to the farm's driveway and turn around or not. Now finally, they could see ahead and the road opened up to some kind of clearing as they pull into it. The road then suddenly abraded and ends as an iron gate with a makeshift sign saying cemetery. Now by this time they spooked themselves out. They were somewhat lost and had just creeped down some old overgrown country road and ended up in a graveyard in the middle of the night. Steve manages to turn the car around and head back, going a little more quickly than before. And they started nearing the driveway to the rundown farm, and they can make out something very tall and glowing white in the driveway of the old place. As the headlights hit the drive, the apparition they now realize is a ghostly white giant old man who's probably 6'5", standing by the side of the road wearing only pants and no shoes, slowly waving at them. They hightailed it out of there. They both couldn't have cared less if they scratched a ride or not. Apparently they've never forgot this story. Back in the summer of 2020, I was traveling with my partner to Boise, Idaho, from Colorado to visit my family and stay for a camping trip. The trek is nearly 15 hours long, and while you can do it in one day, it's better that you stop and have a rest. Now, having lived in Utah at one point in time, I was very eager to show him the natural hot springs in Spanish Fork. They are located in Diamond Fork Canyon and require a 45-minute hike from the parking lot. Still, we were both extremely excited to get out there and moving after 7 hours in the car. When we arrived at first, we realized that the parking lot gate is shut and locked tightly. There's a sign there that says closed, absolutely no access to hot springs, fines of $2,000 max or something to that nature. Now we're bummed. COVID had shut down many things and we just figured that this is outside, so there's no way that this should be closed. After some research on the government website, we discovered that a body had possibly been found in the springs and was likely the cause of the locked gates. So sad and tired, we're sitting in the car. We drove back down the canyon road to find another spot to hike and just camp for the night. Now, most of the more esteemed campsites were closed due to COVID, or were already taken down for the night. Now, this is actually something that we preferred, which is a more dispersed camping site anyway, so we pick a random road to turn on as we drove closer and closer to exiting the canyon. Road 338. The road was mostly well kept and a dirt road. We passed some promising spots near a creek and maybe 2 or 3 other people who were already set up for the night there. We wanted to go a little bit further to see if there was anything with the wow factor. Sounds funny, but some sites gave off that this is the one feeling. We finally come to a dead end in the main road with a fire mitigation road to the right. At this very spot, there was a strange boulder with some type of description on it, partially surrounded by a wooden fence. I had to investigate. The inscription read, "Diamond Battle, June 20, 1866. No way, I thought. A memorial for a battle that happened right here. And a feeling of uneasiness and oddly respect washes over me. After travelling up the fire road more and not being able to find what we were looking for, a campsite, we decided that we wanted to pick a spot on the way to the creek. The creek was looking peaceful, though ever since I read that inscription, I couldn't shake this strange feeling. I'm not really a paranoid person, but I kept feeling on edge, like something was watching us from the woods across the water. As it grew darker, the feeling became stronger. I decided that I didn't want to stay in the open anymore and retreated to the tent to get some well-deserved rest, while my partner stayed up to enjoy the fire. I struggled into our sleeping bag, exhaled comfortably, listening to the creek, and it was much quieter now, and was a bit further from the tent. I started to drift off when I heard it, soft chanting, rhythmic drums. My eyes are shot open. Am I actually hearing this? I strained my ears, listening over and over the running water. I couldn't quite get a clear sound, but it was definitely there. This is when I noticed the ground is rumbling, as if horses were stampeding down the road 100 feet or so from the site. I don't know if I could get up and tell my partner, because I don't know if this is a good idea, but I had the strange feeling that if I said it loud, it would make it more true, and the spirits would come from the trees towards us. Now, I decide that it's somehow more peaceful and respectable if I don't do much now. The next morning we pack up our tent and left, and there was no trace of anything happening the night before. We did eventually enter to where we have cell service, and I did a good research at the area. It turns out that there was a battle there between the Utes and the Mormon militia, and lives were lost on that mountainside. After reading this, I decided to tell my partner what I heard the night before sleeping. I told him about the chanting and the drumming, and even the stomping of the horses. He looks at me in disbelief, saying he heard the exact same thing. I guess I was only in the tent 10 minutes before he got spooked, standing alone by the fire. I heard this distant chanting and drums, he said. He came into the tent and explained that he had an incredibly peaceful sleep. Now, I feel like we're being watched when we were there, as if by Native Americans who lost their lives. A strong but calm and protective presence. I don't know how to describe it. Now, as a young teen/child, I lived in a very strange situation in the woods. I'm not sure if this encounter may have been some kind of entity, or perhaps something different. I hope someone can give me more information about what happened to my friend and I. A female, was about 12 at the time of this, and one of my best friends, I'll call him Alex, must have been 10. Alex's father had purchased a large amount of forested land about 100 kilometers away from the city we lived in, Montreal, Canada. It was all forest when Alex's family occupied it. Now, they cleared a little patch to build a house, and the rest was pure, unaltered forest. Their land was cut in two by a dirt road. If you followed it for several kilometers, led to a few houses, and their land was very different depending on which side of the dirt road you looked. On the right was their house. The forest was light and luminous, or at least it felt that way. It was not too dense, with little rolling hills. It's a lovely place. On the left side of the road, though, it was another story. First, there was a deep ditch, maybe 2 meters deep, which then became quite high and a steep hill. Weirdly enough, all along the road, the ditch was full of car parts. A set of car wheels, a door, a steering wheel, all the way there. All old and overgrown with moss, and over the steep hill, the forest gave off a really bad vibe. It had lots of very tall, dark trees with almost black trunks. The place seemed somewhat devoid of life or anything. Climbing the hill, which we seldom were willing to do because of the creeps it gave us, there was some kind of swamp there. When we were there was this strange pressure. We sensed a kind of strange animal instinct which told us that we have to leave this place. The strange atmosphere was spontaneously obvious to both me and Alex. We playfully called this side of the road Demon's Forest. Now, one weekend day, probably in 2001 or 2, my family and I came to visit Alex's family. Bored by the adults, my friend and I decided to go and play in the forest. Alex's father told us to watch out. There was an animal that had been rummaging in their trash bags and causing other nuisances. Now, he said it was a dog that looked somewhat like a Rottweiler, that surely belongs to someone up the dirt road. He warned us that we shouldn't interact with the dog if we saw it. It didn't look healthy, and as far as he could tell, something was weird about it. He said it somehow looked diseased or contagious, like it had patches of fur missing, but he couldn't remember precisely. So we set out on our walk. It was autumn and the leaves were pretty golden. Now, many having already fallen to the ground, it was a calm, slightly overcast, windless day. The air was very still and calm. Alex and I decided to walk along the dirt road, with the pleasant section of the forest to our right, and the forest demons to our left. We chat for a while, following the road as it rised up over a slope. As usual, we were slightly creeped out going up to the road because of the weird vibes of the forest on the left side, but we were challenging ourselves to be brave and trying not to think about how unsettling it felt. A good distance away from their home, when it was already well out of sight, I noticed the first strange thing of the day. Out of the steep hill on the left side of the road, there's a very large, dark pine tree hanging over the road. Someone's actually attached a pink ribbon to one of the branches, which was already strange because this was the territory of Alex's family, and they had no daughters or other girls that were likely to hang around, or other people who may be the owners of the pink ribbons who were likely to hang out on the deserted road. The strange thing was, the ribbon was falling strongly in the wind. Its loose ends were flapping almost horizontally. The thing is, it's a completely windless day. There was no wind to speak of. The ribbon was within my reach, so I even touched it as it's falling. I even licked my finger and held it in the air to check if I could feel any wind or air current at all, as my dad had taught me. The air's perfectly still. Yet, the ribbon fouled. Now, I mentioned it to my friend. He seemed distracted and was younger than me, and sometimes didn't catch on to what I said, so I don't press the matter. We continue our climb. We reach a place where the hill on the left side of the road had a gentler slope and began further away from the road. In fact, it looked like the hill was kind of carved out in a way that would have made it easy for us to climb to get into the demon's forest. almost as though the hill had been carved into a sloping half circle, like in a theatre, and the road we stood on would have been staged. It gave us a very clear, treeless view of the hillside, full of golden and red fallen leaves. Now the trees began at the top of the hill, maybe 9 meters high. We stopped to admire the view. Canadian autumns are a sight to behold. Alex suddenly got really excited. He thought that he had something in the demon's wood up on the hill and really wanted to pay attention. He explained that there are wild cats in the forest. They had spotted them with his dad, and one of them reportedly had kittens. Kittens being one of the most excitable things in the world for kids our age, getting us riled up. But somehow, my hackles were up, and I couldn't relax really, even thinking about adorable wild kittens. Now, he eventually thought that he heard the cat meow in the forest up by the hill. I heard nothing of that sort and thought he was inventing it. He vehemently suggested that we should try meowing to see if it will respond. Maybe it would even bring his kittens along so we can play with them, he said. I hadn't heard any sounds at all, and I didn't really like the idea of screeching meows into the scary forest. What kind of wild cat would respond to human children anyway? Wouldn't it be obvious that we were not cats by the sounds of us? That seemed like a dumb idea to me. Before I could try to talk him out of it, he loudly meowed into the forest. To my utter shock, the forest meowed back. Alex was absolutely delighted. He meowed again. Something in the forest answered again. I was absolutely shocked. This doesn't make sense to me, and it creeps me out, but I suspended my disbelief to see what would happen. He kept meowing over and over. For every one of his meows, another one come back in response from the woods. But something just felt off to me. Feral or wild animals don't behave that way. Even my 12-year-old self realizes that. It wasn't an echo that the cat did. It did not bounce back any sound that we threw except meows, which it could replicate immediately. And anyway, there were no hard rocky surfaces for the sound to bounce off of, so we couldn't really figure out where it was coming from. Everything is also covered in kind of sound dulling leaves too. Now, Alex eventually gets more excited, saying, listen, the cat's coming towards us. She's coming to see us with the kittens. To my surprise, he's right. There was a rustle of dead leaves moving from above us, from above the slope in the creepy forest, and it sounds like the rustling's getting closer now. But it was way off really, and the cats are small and light. Now careful with their steps that they don't make a ruckus when they walk through the woods. But here, the rustling sounds are extremely obvious, along with the meowing. In fact, it sounded more like steps, like somebody with 2 legs was walking in the leaves and it was getting closer to us. My alarms are going off now, with all the wrongness of the situation, while my younger friend was oblivious. He was calling it more and more vehemently, noticing that the sounds are really coming towards us now. Then I realised it seemed so wrong. The sound is certainly coming towards us, but there was nothing to be seen. Right in front of us, we had the gentle slope of the hills, treeless and clearly visible, already coming from the forest. Should have been pretty plainly in view whatever was in front of us, but we can't see anything. Really weird. No source for the rustling sound. Nothing moves. Oh, her kittens are joining her. Listen, there are more sounds. They're coming to play with us. He was right. The sounds seem to have been multiplied and now come from various directions at once, ever getting closer while simultaneously not being visible. Something was off. I want to leave, but Alex is getting mad at me. The kittens are almost here, and he wanted to see them. He insisted, actually. At this point it's extremely tense, and fight or flight was activating from the wrongness of it all. We were alone and quite exposed to this kind of danger. Whatever it was is getting closer to us, more and more obviously with every moment. Definitely not kittens. I was on the verge of trying to force him to go run home, and then suddenly I heard a very loud panting sound right at my feet. During the first millisecond, I got only mildly surprised. We had a huge husky at home. I was used to it panting at my feet. And then, a sense of profound dread come over me as I realized that obviously my dog isn't here, and it must have been another dog, a very big one to the sound of it, right at my feet. I pacingly and panickingly looked down, ready to jump away from the dog that somehow got extremely close to me. Almost on me, and I didn't realize, but there's absolutely nothing there at my feet. But I still hear the loud, breathy panting sounds coming from down there. I whirl around, all 360 degrees, screaming, "Where is it coming from?" But there's nothing at my feet, or anywhere around me. There is nothing there, yet the sound is so clearly here. As I whirl around in a frenzy, I look up at the dirt road we're following. Around 100 feet away, at the top of the slope, I see a single dog standing there. It looks somewhat similar to a Rottweiler, but in very, very bad shape, extremely unkept, and patches of fur missing, shaggy and dirty as heck, with some skin exposed where the fur is missing. It looks down at us too. Now, obviously, there is no way that I could have heard it from this distance panting, and the source of sound that I'm hearing is directly under my feet. At that point, the flight instinct took over. I have never run desperately before, but I was now, in fear of my life. Thank God it's downhill. Alex keeps pace behind me. He's now terrified. We make it home in one piece. We didn't talk about the woods anymore or go back there. Now, I come back to Alex's place several other times in my life. I never wanted to walk in the woods again. We had amazing parties in his house as teams, and I was often drunk having a great time, but I always had this very stressful sensation when I went out of his home, especially at night. When I slept over there, I had weird strange experiences like waking up with a sense of dread, or the fact that almost something's leaning over me, but nothing was there. I remembered once I woke up and saw something floating near the ceiling. It had the sensation that it was not an immediate threat but was observing. We never discussed what happened that day. Now, each of these happened to me at a popular national park. Now, for one, the first story starts with me trekking into the desert on my own. I'm in my mid-20s. I started to camp/hike along quite a bit, and when I hiked, I would seek the most remote location possible. I'm 5'5" and quite small as a female, and didn't really make the best decisions, like wearing headphones while wandering in there alone, but I had a lot of fun, and had since gotten smarter at going into the wilderness by myself. I had hopped in my car and headed to the desert, as I so often do, and pick a spot to park where there were no cars, tourists, or people of any sort. I grabbed my backpack and headphones and excitedly hopped out of the car to go off and explore and climb some rocks in the distance. I'm feeling good until I get not even a mile out and I see this huge bullet in the dirt. My dad, who is a law enforcement and was National Guard later, said the way I described the size, it had to be from a grounded gun. And there's no way that somebody could have walked through the desert with this weapon. Something about it unsettled me, and I didn't know if I should bring it to a ranger or what. I felt weird trekking there with it, so I ended up awkwardly burying it and moving on. For whatever reason, it put me in an intense, uneasy feeling. I felt jittery and jarred. Now, a few steps later, I heard the weirdest sound I've heard in my life. It was a high-pitched buzzing electric noise that just encompasses the space around me. Now, if you know the desert, you know the acoustics can get weird sometimes and noise bounces off rocks, but this was akin to nothing I've heard, and my instincts and reaction are sheer panic and terror. I fumble my phone and surprisingly have reception. I then call my boyfriend at the time and he tells me that it's probably nothing and just to enjoy myself. I take a few more steps and the noise instantly starts getting louder and louder. My body is screaming to hightail it back to the car, which I do. Now, at this point, I'm really stumbling over myself, and I get back on the phone with my boyfriend and say I feel as though I'm being chased. I make it back and feel such a rush of relief as I get in my car. I know this might sound kind of anticlimactic, but the amount of fear I felt in that moment is something I've never felt before or since. It felt like a warning of sorts to stay away. I strongly believe in my intuition, so I trusted my gut, and it was not telling me anything good about that situation. I was wondering if anybody else had anything similar. Now for my second story. This takes place in the same national park. One thing I love about this park is there's a fairly decent chance that you'll see weird stuff in the sky at night. I attribute it to the fact that there's a military test pilot base fairly close by, but what you really want to see is the strange things. This is my most interesting one. The openness of the desert makes it easy to see beautiful things in the night sky above you. One particular night, I looked up and I saw some objects flying high up in the distance. I remember correctly that one was white and one was red, and they had strange formations, and at paces too fast for any aerial physics that I know of. I can't imagine the G-forces involved, or how they could have technology that allows for speeds that fast. I'm in absolute awe of this for a while. Them zipping around, and to make things more baffling, they move in diagonal lines at certain points, like literally making acute turns. Now, there would also be times it would pause and suspend. It would also zip around and move. The final spectacular one is when I see them flying towards each other and seemingly merge into one object and then change colour. It was really bizarre. Story 3. The last one is more of an annoyance, but I found some rocks on a main trail where somebody had performed some kind of ritual, which I'm not necessarily sure was from a cult or something, but it looks like there was blood there, and that was absolutely not okay. It's probably some kids trying to be cool, but it's definitely creepy. I live in MS, which is home to a majority of the Natchez Trace. The trace is a 440-mile long highway between Nashville and Natchez and runs parallel to a Native American trade route used by southeastern Native American tribes during the early 1700s and 1800s. It was one of the most influential and dangerous trade routes in the southeast due to its connection with eastern states and the MS River. Now, it's a protected state park and roadway system. Think Appalachian Trail. It's not a preferred route really, since it's just 2 lanes and the speeds only go up to 55, and there have been occasional crimes which take place there due to the remoteness and lack of authority, but it's really pretty lands when you're driving through it. Now 25 years ago, we lived in North MS, but the rest of our families lived in South MS, so it just happened that a small time of the trip went along the trace. My mum did a lot of these trips by herself with 3 kids. Most of the drives were safe and normal. However, there's one that made me nervous at 10 and still at 30. It's called Witch Dance. Witch Dance is a walk-in/bike-in trail about 230 miles from Natchez. The legend says that there are patches of burnt/brown earth that will never grow due to witches dancing in the trees. It's probably a made-up story, but there are random patches of brown grass where no matter what, nothing ever grows there. And 26 years since I first drove past there, I still get a cold feeling imagining what could have made it like this. I just don't get it. I'm not the kind of person to believe in this stuff really, especially because I'm not superstitious at all, but two encounters that happened to me made me doubt whatever was actually going on this farm. The first encounter occurred when me and two of my friends were having dinner. Everything is calm and we're eating outside, since this is a relatively big space. That was until we heard a woman scream, which was extremely odd since I live in this very calm area which has very few criminals or even animal attacks since we're in the wilderness. I'm the first one to react. I climb to the wall that separates the house grounds from the animal parts. From there, I can see almost all the houses around mine. My friend gets up after me, and we stay in silence, waiting for another scream. And we heard it. The first one we understand is kind of like a help, which a girl yells, then a bunch of gibberish, which no one can really understand. One of my friends quickly grabs the phone to call the police and assume it's domestic violence or robbery. I grab my axe and another friend follows me to the gate. We didn't leave. Now nobody really knows what to do. Then something sounds odd about the screams. Right before the police arrive, we hear a thud and then glass breaking, and I assume it's a window. As soon as the police arrive, the screaming stops, never to be heard again. The police found nothing. Now later that night, me and my friends stay up chatting about what happened. One of them is oddly quiet, and I ask him what was wrong, and he said that I've heard those before. Those screams. Apparently he heard the woman screaming a couple of times while walking his dog. The next day we get up and decide to go check the house that the screams are coming from. But there was one thing weird about it when we arrive at the place. There's no house. It was forest terrain, with nothing more than big trees and bushes. We came back and decided to forget about what had happened since we wanted to have a good time. No one would relate this encounter with a skinwalker, obviously. I didn't at first, but when it happened twice, I start connecting everything. The second encounter happened with my cousins, similar to the time of the previous night when they're over. We're having a good peaceful dinner. That's when me and my cousins decide to go for a walk in the garden we had. The garden made a frontier with a huge forest, only separated by a small stone wall. We were talking and laughing when I start to hear a man laugh, not in a normal voice. It sounds more like something's in his throat, which produces a weird voice frequency. Again, I grab my axe and my cousin calls his sister, and we go outside near the wall to hear what he's saying. Like the first encounter, we could only understand gibberish coming from him, and he wouldn't stop talking, not even taking moments to capture his breath. After a while of listening to it, we realize that we can't do anything about it, so we leave and finish our dinner. They leave and I find myself alone in here. It was quite unsettling. Then I start overthinking more and more, and I remembered the times that my dog would spend entire nights barking at the forest, when all the existing animals were wiped out by the hunters. Now, I remembered the warnings my parents gave me when I was a child, to always leave the forest and lock all the doors before sunset. Regardless of my questions, they would never tell me why, because as I mentioned before, it's a calm location in a calm country. I couldn't understand why they had so many worries. Now it actually all ended when the lumberjacks came through and took out all the trees, leaving the forest pretty visible. Before the trees were cut down, you couldn't see in there even during the day. After the trees were cut down and the good weather came, nothing happened, and my dog actually stopped barking at the wall. Now I'm a park ranger, and one night in 2006 or 7, I guess, I noticed a campfire in the distance and went to investigate, as setting up camps in the area is not allowed as conservation efforts are in place. I walk over and no one was here, and thought, idiots there, why are they leaving a fire unattended? So I went over there and there were about 2 tents from what I remembered, and no one radioed in, so that's pretty bizarre. I then radio in and asked for a couple of guys to come over and clear up. When they arrived, I went to look for any signs of there being anybody else around. There must have been something. Now, it was only a couple of minutes later and I don't find anything, and we decide that we'll leave after extinguishing the fire and clearing up. We had one of the guys stay there as we had unattended equipment. Then I went back to the office as I was due a break. After the break, I went out and saw a group of 3 who seemed fairly distressed. I approached them and asked them what they're doing down this neck of the woods, and they said that they were camping and had been told to leave their campsite immediately. I became suspicious as we had no rangers working there. I asked them who they saw, and they said they saw somebody wearing a very old-fashioned clothing. Supposedly he had no face virtually, and at this point I have shivers up and down my spine and tell them, go and collect your gear and equipment. And they went to get their equipment, and then I see them leaving. I have only mentioned this to my friend who works in the park from 2006. He hadn't had any similar reports of such things up to this day. This was one of my scariest stories, and I still have no clue what happened, but when hearing that in the dark in the middle of the woods, it really sent shivers down my spine. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest as an avid hiker. Now in 2013, a group of friends invited me to go mushroom hunting in the Siuslaw National Forest, about an hour outside of Portland from where we lived. We spent significant time there in the coastal forest, but mushrooms tended to cluster in the areas with lighter foliage cover. Now, a de facto expert had experience foraging off of old logging roads and suggested a spot that we go to that he visited a year prior. We drove over to the end of a one-dirt road which overlooked a deep ravine. Each of us put our gear and buckwash through undergrowth, checking the leaves and debris for fungi. After about 20 minutes, I come across a small clearing of trees, perhaps a one-time campsite for loggers. About halfway across the fence, I noticed something pink on the ground ahead. What I saw stops me dead in my tracks. Resting on the leaves was the heart of an unknown animal, roughly the size of my fist, still untouched by the elements and fauna. There was no trace of a body in the immediate area, no other organs, remnants or flesh or visible blood is spotless. The heart had no bite marks and the tissue was still dark red. I ran like my life depended on it back to the car. Mercifully, my friend decided to hang back. We rounded up everyone and left immediately. So I live in Austin, Texas. We have a metropolitan park located in North Austin that's almost 300 acres. I visit this park often and have never had a weird experience until now. This park has a ton of trails for mountain bikes and hiking. There are also other areas that have creeks which run through the park. Now 2 days ago, I took my 4 kids and myself on the trail hiking. We arrived at the trailhead around 4 PM and started our hike. There are 3 bridges over water that we passed during the hike. Each bridge was at least half a mile apart. Our destination required us to pass along all 3 bridges before we started to make our way back. We made it to our destination. As we start walking back, we don't have any issues, only the occasional mountain biker who passes us by. On the way back, as we walk over the second bridge, my kids and I, now they're all under the age of 10, heard someone very clearly in a female voice say, "Hi dear, come over here," twice, from under the bridge. The first time we heard it, we all stop in our tracks and look at each other like, "Did you hear that?" My 9-year-old daughter even asked me, "Mum, what was that? Did you hear this?" And my 3-year-old appears very perplexed. There was no one in sight. I even look under the bridge and I can't see anybody there. I can hear rustling though, and then I hear it again, identical in tone and pitch and duration. "Hi dear, come over here," almost robotic. This was about an hour or so into the hike, around 5 p.m. At that point, we all started swiftly walking towards the trailhead. No one said a word the whole time. I remained calm, as I always carry my side piece, so I had a form of self-defense to rely on, but still, it definitely spooked us out. Now there's a playground not far from the trailhead. I asked my kids if they want to play on the playground and they all say no without missing a beat, and we go straight back. I still have no idea what it was. It sounded just like a recording, but it wasn't. So this happened last year in Virginia, and is the reason that I will never ever go backpacking alone again. I was taking summer courses at the time, and we ended up with a 3-day weekend in June, so I thought this was a great time to go explore some of the Virginian wilderness. Now, I did a Google search and found a state park with a trail that looked nice, and let my roommate and family know the trail I was going to be on. When I got close to the park area, I saw a little outdoor shop where people hiking the Appalachian Trail stop. I went in to grab a map of the area just in case I got lost. As I was talking to the owner, he mentioned a trail that's not well known that had a pretty cool waterfall and swimming hole. This piqued my interest, so I had him show me on the map. It took me outside the state park, but he said it's a great place to visit. I paid for the map and thanked the owner. I texted my roommate and parents about the new trail, and I parked my car and set off on my adventure. I should note that the waterfall was going to be a side trip from my journey. I was planning 3 days and 2 nights. I started on part of the Appalachian Trail, and it was pretty packed with people from all kinds of different places who were fun to talk to. As expected, I got further and further away from the main trails, and I now encounter less and less people. Around early afternoon, 3 miles from my destination, I noticed it was unnaturally silent, with no birds, no bugs or even wind, with a weird feeling of being observed. I shook it off as overanalyzation of the situation. I got to the waterfall and it wasn't that spectacular, but it was pretty cool to look at. Plus it had a good sized area to swim in, so naturally I stripped down and took a dip. It's pretty refreshing. As I was getting my clothes back, I started whistling to myself, because it's pretty chill and it was stuck in my head. That's when I heard something whistle back in the same tune. I thought it was a bird copying me, so I went back and forth with it. Now it actually repeats what I'm doing, which I think is pretty cool. As I was setting up camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched again, like I'd actually get goosebumps and the hairs on the back of my neck would stand up. As night fell, I built a small fire and lit my jet to boil dinner. As I did, I then become hyper aware again, and there's no sounds, just silence. Some of my brain is telling me that it's not safe and to leave, but I decide to ignore it and just crawled into my tent with my flashlight and book. I went to sleep without incident. I woke up the next morning and my site was trashed. My camp stool was nowhere to be found. My bear bag with food was cut down and contents are scattered. My first thought is that a crafty animal has chewed through the rope and got to the bag, but I look at the rope and it was cut with something distinctly sharp. Plus none of the food is even disturbed. I've also realised there's some footprints here now, and by the way I'm about 8 miles away from a road. As I was looking at the mess, I heard a branch snap off in the distance. I turned to look in that direction. I saw nothing, but I heard that whistling again. The same from yesterday, but it sounded different now and more sinister. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end as I listened to this, and my instincts tell me to get out. It sounded like it was a little off in the distance, but definitely not too far, and the whistling's now getting closer as I finish stuffing up my thing in my bag. I didn't bother putting away everything properly. The whistling was insistent and sounded like it's coming from all directions. I actually get fed up with the whistling sound and yell, "Hey, stop! Do what you want. What are you doing?" It then stopped for a moment and went quiet, then repeated in my voice. It sounded like me, but kind of distorted, like it come from an old TV. After I heard this, I immediately threw my pack on and now start running in the direction that I've come from. Now, I didn't even bother looking behind myself. Now, I keep hearing the voice sounding like it's toying with me. I heard it moving just behind me and faster now. It felt like it was toying with me, never coming too close but being too far, just present. Eventually it sounded like it got further away from me, then it suddenly stopped. I now decide to turn around and wish that I didn't. As I do so, I am met with the most bone-chilling screech that I've ever heard coming from right next to me. That's when I start running again, and I didn't look, I only ran. I get less than half a mile, and then I have to slow down. I then meet a couple that's backpacking. They saw the look of terror on my face, asking me what was wrong, and if that was me that screamed. I tell them about what happened, and they decided not to go down that area. We moved to a more populated area in the trail as soon as we can. As soon as I got back to my car, I drove to one of the park ranger stations and reported what had happened. Since the site was off the park grounds, they told me that it wasn't in their jurisdiction, but they'll send a ranger to investigate. The ranger station parking lot ran right off into the woods, and when I was getting into my Jeep, I heard the Chill Bill tune coming from the woods in front of me. I've never drove so fast in my life. Now the following is a series of weird things that happened to me that I truly can't explain. Now what annoys me most about this is that I've tried to tell people my experience and they kind of just laugh it off. Actually, I told one of my colleagues at work today. I work as a Forest Server fire patrol person, but when I told them my story, they kind of just laughed at me and said, "Oh yeah, is that really what happened?" And that really annoys me. And this is supposed to be someone that's quite similar and that I'd actually consider a friend there, and also had weird experiences before, so I just don't get it. People are so eager to hear what you say, but then they're so happy and quick to dismiss everything. I just don't get it. But let's dive into my story and hopefully at least a few of you will understand. Now, emotionally, I wasn't really the same after this. I don't know why. I'm not a spiritual person and I don't really believe in religion much, but this kind of made me think about what else is really out there. Where I live, there can be lots of snow all the time, but I love to go on my little adventures, and there was a forest that was supposedly haunted near where I lived. Now I'd heard quite a few things about this place, and apparently you'll hear screams in the night. You'll see headless people wandering around, and I guess just the works really. Now I'd actually been here on 2 occasions before. One was when I drove out with one of my friends, but to be honest, it was just the biggest waste of time. I mean, literally nothing happened. We were driving for a long time to get there, and basically nothing happened and we just get bored and come back. So I wasn't expecting too much in the second time that I'd been there. Again, nothing had happened, but in more recent times, I'd moved much closer and thought, why not go? Also, there was quite a nice snowfall, so I thought this was pretty cool. I really like going on adventures at night time like this, especially when the elements are involved. For whatever reason, it kind of makes me feel almost like I'm in a movie, especially if I've got my AirPods with me and I just listen to songs, and it really creates a vibe. I always found it empowering, but yeah. So I set out at night, and I walk towards the forest off of the main path, and it's really dark. The stars are looking absolutely beautiful above me, and luckily there's no cars coming, so I just get off and straight into where the forest starts. There was probably about 30 meters of snow or whatnot before it actually starts. Then you're hit by lots of trees. Now I turn my flashlight on and suddenly I can see really well. I had a really powerful one that was actually adapted for cameras and stuff. I was actually joking with one of my friends, it's like turning on the daytime and there's nothing to be scared of. And I also said that this probably scares away the spirits more than anything. They probably think it's God. I think of these jokes as I can see my breath in front of me from the cold. Now, it's kind of like the snow that's fallen quite quickly to the ground, almost like it's kind of sleet, but it's not. It's still snowing. I notice it as I take my first steps into the forest. I have some pretty skinny trees on either side of me when I see something that looks odd. I can see what appears to be a white silhouette to my left when suddenly it vanishes. I'm a little confused by this, but suddenly I realise that it must be my breath from where I've got my scarf and things. I think it's a little odd and I tell myself just to relax a bit and I keep walking. The trees are kind of like overarching here and it actually looks really beautiful. I do notice one odd thing. There seems to be footprints that lead off from the main trail, but they kind of look like hoof shapes. I thought maybe some kind of animal went through here, or God knows what. It couldn't have been horse riding because the branches are actually too low. To give you an idea, they're probably about 8 feet above me or dropping down to 5, so you'd have to duck sometimes. Now these aren't nice branches too. They're the kinds that come snagged on each other, and if you make one loose, it's going to kind of whip you in the face. And I didn't want to lose my eyes. But it wasn't too much of an issue really. So when I set off, I didn't really have a direction or place that I wanted to go to. I heard there was an old church that used to be here and I thought, you know what, that would be pretty cool if I can find that. Who knows what would happen if I go there on my own. Now at the time, I was certain no other people around because I literally can't hear anything or see anyone. A really good telling sign is the fact that there's no lights. You kind of need lights to see where you're going out here, but I literally couldn't see any. Every so often, I look off into the woods and I don't see anything. I did notice one or two strange sounds, but they didn't happen too frequently. I know that there's lots of animals out here because of my normal line of work, and just I guess from having some good sense about my surroundings, so I didn't let it put me off. I knew I had to be careful of certain animals out here because I guess some could hunt at night, but I was going to be far bigger and they wouldn't dare go to me. The sky almost looks like a beautiful orangey colour above me because of my torch, and I think that's really pretty. I do start to feel the cold a bit now, so decide to pick up the pace. Another interesting thing is there's lots and lots of footprints on this path which have been here earlier. And I think that's a little bit bizarre because usually people don't hum here too often. I'm very used to going out here and there's no one around. So that was interesting. As I'm walking, the snow's now going directly into my face and it actually made it a bit annoying, to be honest. I stopped for a moment to try and figure out the direction of it so I can try and avoid it when I hear a howling off. Now I don't know exactly where it's coming from, but there seems to be another little trail where you can cut through going off of the main path, but I decide not to follow it just in case. I was kind of expecting to run into some crazy dog walker or something, but they never showed up, so I think this is a little bit odd. Eventually I come up to one of the trail signs and I can see some of the wildlife that lives here, and I think to myself, well, there's definitely nothing that's going to hunt me, as it's just birds and things like that. But I do wonder what the sound is that I heard. Now, I go a little bit further along, and eventually the snow picks up even more now. It felt a little bit different, and almost like the weather had become more hostile now. Again, I'm not a spiritual person, but It almost started to feel a bit more like the air was different here. Now, the only way I can describe what I was seeing if you haven't been in the woods at night in the snow is everything sort of looks like an infinite dream. It's almost like somebody's made an unlimited map of just forest, snow, woods, and it's just going to keep on going forever. You do have to be careful out here though, because if you really go off the path, then you don't want to be stuck out in the cold like this. As you can imagine, trying to get a fire going is not easy at the best of times, let alone here. As I'm thinking of this, I hear sounds up above again. I can hear somebody scurrying through the tree line. Well, at least that's what I think it is. And I pause for a second, and I go to switch my flashlight with one that has more of a focus beam. And I kid you not, as this is happening, I can see what appears to be a really small kind of lanky armed person scurrying through the woods. And I take a moment to figure out what this is. I quickly flicker on my other light, which is more powerful, and I don't see anything, so I just put it down to my mind going a little bit loose. I do have to say, I've never seen anything like this, and I think this is really weird. Annoyingly, my eyes didn't adjust well enough in the darkness to actually see this thing, and I have tried telling this part to some other people, but again, they all just say, oh yeah, it's just a rabbit. But I mean, come on, I've seen rabbits, and this thing had lanky arms. I can only describe it as if a person was about 3 feet tall, had a very large torso, and very long skinny arms that dragged the floor. But I don't know where they've gone. I tried looking around for more footprints, but I can't see anything, and this gives me a little bit of adrenaline to pick up the pace. I knew I'd gone out here hoping to find some ghosts and things, but now I wasn't so sure if I actually wanted to find them or not. Now again, I can see a mist form just in front of me, then slowly disappear again. It was a white mist, and it's really like somebody's just breathed in front of me and then vanished. I try and replicate how I was standing a few moments ago and pace backwards and start breathing more heavily to see if it was me, but there's nothing there. Pretty confused at this point, but I decided to just pick up the pace more. Now, I had one other scary experience before from being out in the woods I can think of now, but this was more to do with an animal than anything supernatural. I remember I'd gone somewhere and a big old moose appeared, and it was extremely close to me. For whatever reason, it didn't really take notice of me, it just looked at me for a second, but I remember that scared me. But that feeling that I had was kind of beginning to loom over me, and I started to wonder if maybe there was a large animal like that around. Now this is when I noticed the first strange structure. It's something that I hadn't realised before. It's a large wooden structure that looks like 3 trees, kind of in a Stonehenge shape, but a little bit less spread out. This is really weird. It's like they've been carved by hand and placed upright. And what was really bizarre is that there isn't much snow in the middle. It seems like the ground is staying particularly dry here, and not snow forming. Now, I think this is really bizarre because, well, where I am there shouldn't be anything like this. I would have been aware of it too, and I don't understand why I'd never noticed it before. It now becomes apparent that I'm not actually on the main path. I switch off my flashlight once more, and I just take a few seconds to take in everything. I'm trying to give my eyes some time to adjust to the darkness, and I look down at my battery. It's dropped down to 40% on the main flashlight thing, and that's a bit of a worry. Batteries drain pretty quick in the cold, and now I notice that there's more of the mist forming up ahead of me. I actually take a second just to assess what this actually is, but I can't figure out what it is. It's almost like a group of people standing there, kind of just like breathing or talking normally, but there's no one around, and it only seems to be spawning in a specific spot. Now, I once more get closer and try and figure out what this is, but I just can't. Now it reminds me of a story of what one of my other fire ranger friends had told me about. Sorry to go off topic, but I think it's important because it might have been linked to what I saw. Now, one of my good friends had been working in the service for quite a number of years, and he would always try and prank us and pretend there was scary things out there. We never believed him, and sometimes he would actually get us with Halloween masks and stuff, and that was pretty creepy. But I remember one day that he come up to us and he looked very freaked out. He said, "Guys, I saw something and I don't know what it is." We ask him to elaborate and he refuses for a while, but because I'm good friends with him, eventually he decides to tell me what he saw. Apparently, he thought he saw a fire, so he went over to investigate it. Apparently it was just a small red cherry glow, but that could be the start of something. Just as he got to where it was, it suddenly went out, and there was a very big mist that appeared, which is like a smoky white colour. It almost looked like there was a huge fire in terms of the amount of smoke, but nothing was burning. He said it stayed here for literally 3 or 4 minutes as he stared at this bewildered, until eventually it just vanishes. Now the reason that I'm telling you this is because it was incredibly similar to what I saw, in terms of how he described it, the way that it moved, the slight opaqueness of it, everything was just weird. I stood there for what must have been about a good 4 minutes before eventually I decided that, yeah, I'm probably gonna have to press through this now. I couldn't be waiting around here all day, and I decided to be brave and walk through it. I actually held my breath just before I did so because I didn't know if it was maybe some kind of dangerous chemical or something that had leaked out, but there wasn't anything. I eventually make it through after what felt like ages, to be honest, and I was actually gasping for breath. It probably took me a good 20 seconds to get through this. Eventually when I do, I turn around to try and figure out where it had gone, and I can't see it. I do think that I can see something just moving off into the distance, but I can't be sure. It was almost like a group of people had vanished, but one of them had just went off into the woods. Now, I'm a little bit freaked out, but again, I was here alone, so there's not really too much I can think of this. Now, I do notice something else very weird. There seems to be lots of really bizarre shaped footprints going off in different directions. They're all kind of like the hoof shaped, like the thing I'd seen earlier, but they're really far spread apart, like something quite tall had been walking. But it's walking as though that it's in complete arrogance to the trees that are there, like they don't exist, and again, I don't know what kind of animal could have done this. Now, I walk on. I haven't really got a direction this time. I just know that I need to keep going. I have a feeling that I'm in a bad spot, and that's when I see something. This time I was certain that I was seeing something that was actually there. It was very far away, but I can only describe this as something which is completely black, with these white tusk arm things that was about 4 feet tall that hops around. I only saw this for a couple of seconds and it vanishes, but it's probably the scariest part of the encounter for me. I don't want to describe it as like a demonic thing because again, I'm not spiritual, but I don't really know what this was. It's like a really weird creature that would stand awkwardly and almost like it was just bent out too far and shouldn't be balanced, but it was. I flash on both the lights at the same time searching for it, but again, I don't see anything. I then realise that I'm not too far from a lake that I'm actually familiar with, and that's when I noticed a strange glow coming from the other side of it. Now, it was kind of like a glow of like a power plant would give, I guess, in the horizon. Almost like heat waves of light just emanating out slowly, again in the white colour, but almost having more of an energy to it. I decide that I have to investigate. Now, I was actually stupidly close to the shoreline now, because one slip, one twisted ankle, and I could go through the ice and no one would get me here. I'd die of hypothermia before rescuers could find me, but the sense of adventure had taken over. I turn my light around again, and I can't see anything. For a second, I'm sure I can make out the faint glow of two eyes, but I don't know if this is just an animal, so I'm not too worried. There's also strange sounds coming from over where the light is, and it's almost like lots of people talking played backwards, really far off, really far, like barely audible, but I could hear it. The forest was pretty quiet at this time, and I think it made it worse. I'm constantly flashing around with my lights, trying to just get whatever this is to show up more, but I can't see anything. Now, I know some people are asking me, why wasn't I more scared at that weird thing I'd seen? And to be honest, I can't tell you that. It was almost like I was drawn into something, and a mixed personality had taken over where I was seeing weird things and they weren't welcoming, but they weren't worrying for whatever reason, like I had to go on further. I decided that I need to keep up my pace now, but I have some pretty good thoughts, and I think, well, I don't want to fall in the water and die, so I go off now. At this part, the trees are a lot thicker than before, and that was a bit more reassuring. But that lake, I'm constantly hearing sounds from over where that lake is, and I just cannot for the life of me figure out what they are. I actually can't remember the sounds too well, and I don't know if it was because I was in a bit of a heightened state during the experience, but I just remembered they were weird sounds, like scratching and things like that. Now, I know it could have easily been a group of people on drugs or God knows what, but given the weather conditions, I think that's extremely unlikely. Again, this is something one of my incredible colleagues told me that that's what this could have been, and joking that it was green men and aliens, but I don't understand it, because again, these people are so interested to hear what I was saying, and maybe they're denying it because they're scared of what I'm telling them, or just refuse to believe it, but that annoyed me. And I've always been somebody who has the ability to break down the physics of things. If something has happened, I don't immediately go to the irrational explanation. I think with a scientific mind, but it failed me this day, because I can't come up with much for what was happening to me. Now I continue on as the snow gets a little bit thicker now. I think the reason for this might have been because there weren't as many thin trees blocking out all of the snow to capture it, just quite a few big ones with more space in between, but it did actually make my legs hurt. I noticed my knees are quite cold, so my remedy for this is once again to pick up the pace. I clear some of the snow that's actually settled on me, and I actually feel a bit better now. There's quite a big drop off down to the lake now, and I realise that I'm going uphill. What was weird though is that I haven't been to this area before, and I can't really find it. Even since I've been back to the forest again, I've never been able to find this exact spot. Now, it was like somebody had described the area that I was in to somebody else, and they'd tried to make it but not done it exactly the same, and you kind of know deep down that you're not in exactly the same place, but there's enough familiarity for you to feel confident in the situation. Now, as I get closer to the light that I could see, I realised that this definitely isn't the moonlight, because it was kind of flickering like it had an electrical energy to it, and was kind of flashing around into the clouds a little bit, not like lightning, but kind of like the northern lights, and that was what I find really bizarre. Just the whole energy of whatever this was is like nothing that I've ever seen before. A little bit scared now, I start to slowly pan around trying to see anything, but I can't find a thing. Every so often I hear sounds of movement behind me, but I can't be sure what this is. I decide that I just need to keep it moving, and that was one of the things that made me feel more safe in this situation now. I eventually come up onto the bend and I start approaching towards where the light is directly now. Now again, I'm not too scared or shy of adventures, so I have to keep pressing forward one step at a time. I do notice something odd, and that's that there aren't any steps up here. I know people might not have gone here in the daytime, but it does seem weird because there was just so many earlier that I'd seen pretty much everywhere. The snow had actually slowed down a little bit and it wasn't as abrasive on my face, and this was quite nice. My nose and toes always seem to suffer, especially in the cold, along with my hands. I think I have a problem where they don't have very good blood, or they just seem to switch off in the cold, but it made the going a little bit tough and less comfortable. Now, had I found the ghost that I was looking for? Not just yet. So I decide that I need to go towards the light. But again, the way that the light is kind of bouncing off the clouds, almost like it's the northern lights, was just really strange. I was incredibly drawn into this, almost like I was looking at a hypnotist's watch. It was incredibly beautiful, but just really weird. I didn't know if it was related to an electrical storm, but it wouldn't really make sense for me. I have seen something bizarre while working on the service, so again, a little bit similar to this. I remembered one time that I was working. I was actually in the station and I just made myself a coffee. I went to step outside and had a look around at the sky at night just because it's so beautiful, and I do notice something odd. There's almost like a large blue electrical ball of light in the sky. It's opaque and not really visible, and it only lasted for a few seconds, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before. A few of my colleagues had actually reported seeing it as well while on duty at the exact same time that I did, and this kind of had the same characteristics, but it wasn't identical. But I want to find out what this is, and I wasn't as scared as I was before. Now, the closer I get, there's something else I notice which is pretty bizarre, and that's that the sky seems to be kind of imitating this very loosely. It's almost like somebody turned on a pulse of electricity through the clouds above me. It's almost like the northern lights are above the whole sky now, but extremely faint, but the same colour as the clouds, so again, it's almost like they were pulsating a bit. I did get scared because there's the eye condition that someone in my family has, which is actually a little bit similar to this, but I've been tested for it multiple times since and after this event, and it's always come up clear. But in the moment, I was pretty scared because I really worry about having issues with my vision. Now, luckily it turned out it wasn't my eyes, and I quickly did some tests by looking at the ground and things that weren't moving to realise that nothing was off. But why was the sky moving? I wasn't so sure what was happening, but I wasn't that far away now from where I needed to be. That's when I noticed another wooden structure. It's similar to what I've seen before, but it kind of formed more of a hexagon type of shape. Every so often I would see these on either sides of the trail, and they seemed to be increasing in frequency as I got closer to the light. I only saw about 3 more of them, but again, never seen it since. I stop for a moment, and I can see my breath on my light as I take my mask down just to try and get a better feel of what was happening. I shine the torch around, but again, I don't see much of anything. Don't know what I was expecting to see. I've just got the glow dead ahead of me now, and I know I have to get there. It's not much longer now before I'm there, so at least I've got that to look forward to, and I can eventually start heading back. I'm not sure how far I'd actually come at this point, but I've probably been walking for about a good 50 or 60 minutes. It doesn't sound like much, but usually you'll feel it more than I was in this situation, because walking in the snow is actually really difficult sometimes, and the cold can kind of zap out all of your energy. Now, I'm not too far away from where this is, and I can hear the voices again. It sounds like whispering. I can make out the odd word or two, but nothing seems to be in a language that I understand. It's definitely in a language though, and it hasn't increased in volume or anything since when I first heard it earlier. I don't know if it was there the whole time because I kind of just zoned out to it, but I suddenly noticed it much more than I had done earlier. And again, this is pretty weird to me because, like I said, I've never heard anything like it, and it was a bit creepy. Now, I eventually come up to the last clearing where the light should be, and I'm quite excited to get here. There seems to be lots of footsteps here everywhere, so I'm pretty convinced that I've made it back onto the main path now. I've got a good feeling now, and I know that there must be somebody there, so I feel pretty happy. So, what do? Take my steps around it. I can definitely hear the voices on the right side of me now, and I keep stopping every couple of seconds to approximate exactly where it is. Every so often I see movement up ahead of me, and I'm convinced that it's people out here now, so I feel much more relaxed and reassured. I'm now going down the last straight part that I have to go to, with the trees kind of forming an arch above me, and the snow still everywhere around me. Now, some people have asked me why did I keep going and what was I actually doing out there. That was my friends at work earlier, and I don't know. I guess it kind of felt like I'd been there for too long and I was at least going to get something out of it, and yeah. So, I continue up and I eventually find where the clearing is, and I realise that I've only got about another 20 feet of a walk to figure out what this is, and I can see movement again. I decide that the best thing to do in this situation is just to slowly sneak up on who or whatever it is up ahead of me. Now yes, I've got them, I think. I can see some more lights ahead too. I'd see 2, then 3, then they go out. I don't have my light on at this point because I want the element of surprise. The snow is coming against me, but not directly in my face, so this is pretty pleasant. Now, I come up to where I can hear the voices finally getting louder and louder, and my excitement is growing. It feels like I've been here for too long trying to figure out what is actually going on, and I'm gonna get my taste of it soon. I am kind of looking over my shoulder every so often though, because I do hear sounds like I'm being followed. Again, I keep thinking I'm seeing movement, but there's not much of anything when I focus, so I try not to think of it. I don't actually have my torch on now, so I can't verify the fact that there's nothing there. But again, I just presumed it was people. And I thought, well, they haven't said anything to me, and I'm not disturbing them, so why are they going to be annoyed at me? It was almost like an overconfidence, and eventually, I come up to the tree line and the clearing. I start going a lot slower now as I get closer and closer to where I can hear them all. Now the chanting is still illegible, and I take my first step up, and I look around and I can see what must be hundreds of people all standing around the edge of some kind of clearing. They've all got their hands raised up and they're making some weird chanting sound. Now they're not actually that close to me, so it's pretty difficult to make out how tall they are, but these things seem really small. I say things because I don't know if they were people unless they were on their knees, but that's what it looked like. I start to shake a little bit as I feel a lot more like I'm in danger now. I decide that I'm gonna slowly turn my flashlight on for a second and figure out what this actually is. My eyes adjust more and more to the darkness every couple of seconds, and I notice something wrong. They don't look like normal people. The shape of them's all wrong and their arms are too long, and they're all either wearing some white things on their arms, but it looks very pointy, just like the things I'd seen earlier. I try as best I can to slowly flicker on the torch, but I cannot do it. Again, I start shaking more and more and try and press it, but nothing happens. I keep on and on flicking until eventually it flashes on, and for a split second I can see these things. They're like very dark small creatures with weird pointy arms, all facing up to the sky making some weird sounds. Their mouths are what really scare me. It's like just a circle with lots of jagged teeth. And just as I'm taking this all in, they suddenly vanish, and so does the sounds. I quickly fire the torch around everywhere trying to see where they've gone, but I can't see anything. I can hear my heartbeat in my ears like a constant rhythmic drum. And then, a few moments later, I hear movement, rustling and the sounds as though hundreds of people are all coming towards me suddenly. And I take off. I turn my torch on and quickly dart up ahead of myself, constantly looking over my shoulder with the torch. What I have just seen, I don't know, but I knew that I was in danger and had to get out of there. Luckily, I can retrace my footprints for most of the journey until I get away from the clearing. I can hear the sounds are still coming after me, just much slower than me, but they're still coming. I stop for a second and fire the torch around everywhere but can't see anything, and I drop it. Now, I managed to drop it not only into the snow, but face first, and that also means there's no light illuminating back at me, it's kind of buried. Just as I say to myself, you've got to be kidding me, I can hear something else not far up ahead of me. So I take off. Thank God I actually brought the other torch with me, because I'm absolutely certain at the fact that I would have had cardiac arrest otherwise. Now, the only problem I've got is the other torch isn't that easily accessible right now. I put it away when I was trying to hide and be not heard, but now I'm starting to think that wasn't really a good idea. And because I've had this on and so close to my face, I haven't really adjusted to the dark, and I don't know where I'm going. I used to be quite good at long distance cross country, so I have that in my favour. But I soon realise those years are way behind me, and I come up to a point where there's two paths. One's much smaller and seems untrodden but should be closer to where I need to get to. The other is what seems to be closer to where the light is, and I have to choose the latter. Now I take off down this path, and I keep fumbling trying to get the other torch on, but for whatever reason I just can't seem to do it. I don't know if it was for the fact that it was in the cold for too long, but in those moments it just would not come back to life again, and I'm just hitting it on my palm constantly. Now it's extremely difficult to navigate in this moment. I think I know where I'm going, but I can't really tell. There's clearly lots and lots of different footprints on this path, and I can't tell if they're normal or not because I was rushing so much, but it gives me some reassurance that I must be going in a relatively good direction to escape whatever this is. Now I should mention at this point that the sounds are long gone. I'd absolutely blitzed something that seemed like it couldn't go much quicker than a light walking pace, but it didn't matter. I don't know what was chasing me or why. I don't know what I'd just disturbed. Eventually, I flick my torch on again, and I illuminate the rest of the way back. I turn it off again quickly because I'm not sure how good the battery is and I really needed to conserve it. I stop for a few moments to collect my breath and look around me, and I think I know my bearings now, and I start to walk. The only reason that I had to walk now is because I was so out of breath and exhausted from moving in the snow that I genuinely was going to have to crawl the rest of the way out otherwise. I now make it up to another clearing where I can see the lake. I look around everywhere, and what's really weird, I can't see the light glow that I saw earlier. It's genuinely nowhere. I was convinced I should still at least be able to see that out of all things, but there's literally nothing. I don't get it. And the sky, it still didn't look right, but it wasn't like before. So where did the light go? I didn't have much time to focus on it, but I was truly perplexed, and this is something that I still think about now. I managed to get my torch on again, and I don't know, it sounds stupid, but I was trying to recharge whatever energy it was and fire it around everywhere, hoping to see the light again, just to know it was there. But again, I don't see anything. Now, I'm pretty spooked out now, but I have to keep going. I eventually make it into a more familiar area, and I'm actually feeling confident finally. I've adopted more of a walking pace because I was a little bit worried that if anyone was out there and I ran up on them, they might think I was trying to attack them. I do stop constantly though, and look around, desperately trying to see something or anything around me, but again, I can't see anything or anyone. I was desperately hoping that I'd see a group of people just to explain what I'd seen, or at least to be able to tell somebody, but I can't see anything. The snow's picked up a little bit more now, and it wasn't pleasant. I realised too that I must have been out of here for quite a long while because the battery's virtually entirely drained on the torch. I know because it's gone pretty dim. I probably have the worst torch in the world because when the battery's low it goes really dim to conserve it, but it doesn't last very long, so what's the point? The other light that I have is far superior, but that's long gone. I decide to leave it for whatever's out there to enjoy it. I know I'm never seeing that thing again. I'm someone who usually hates losing things too, but I was so scared I didn't even think about trying to recover it. Now, the trees are getting thinner and thinner, and that gives me a pretty good idea that I'm not too far away from where I need to be now. I can't be 100% certain that I'm back to safety, but this is a pretty good indicator of it being the case. Now, I continue this walking pace, and I'm constantly looking behind myself. Now, momentarily, I start shaking again and don't know why. Then suddenly, I realise I hear something making a screeching sound. It's kind of at a medium volume, but it sounds like it's coming from exactly behind where I was. I'm not so worried now because with a few steps, I'm eventually back to where the forest ends, and I'm not too far from safety. I look around for anything to have been following me, but I can't see anything, and I quickly make my way over to my car. I start it up, turn the lights on full, and take one last look into the forest, and I can't see anything. I get back into my car and drive the rest of the way home, completely in shock about the whole experience. Now, I really don't know what happened to me that day, and I truly don't like sharing my story with colleagues at work because they don't really listen to me, but I know what I saw, and I don't know what it was. It could have been spiritual, it could have been anything, but I sure as hell don't have a clue what that was, and that scares me